Joseph D. Ball was a serial killer who is nicknamed the Alligator Man and the Butcher of Elmendorf. He was born on January 5, 1896 in Elmendorf, Texas. He grew up in a pretty stable family with 2 other siblings and his parents, who were both born in Texas. During his young life, Joe would mostly not participate with the other children, and he would usually just spend time with himself. When he reached adolescence, his main hobby was guns. His skills came in handy on April 6, 1917, when the U.S. declared war on Germany. Joe enlisted and was shipped off to Europe. In 1919, he received honorable discharge from the Army and returned home to Texas. After he returned home to Texas in the early 1900s, before Prohibition had ended, Joe Ball would sell alcohol legally. After Prohibition ended, he opened up a bar called the Sociable Inn. Behind Joe's bar, he had built a cement pool where he kept 5 pet alligators. Joe was known to hire the prettiest women in his bars. He would always say how they never stayed long and were just looking for a quick buck to cover things up. He would shoot and or slaughter his victims, and then he would feed some of the remains to the alligators. Joe had been married to a woman named Dolores Goodwin. Before her, he had been involved with a woman named Minnie, who was nicknamed Big Minnie. Joe had killed Big Minnie at the beach. He had confessed this to his wife Dolores, but she didn't believe him. Investigators had later found Big Minnie's body in the sand. People became suspicious as to what Joe Ball was up to after many barmaids, old girlfriends, and his wife had gone missing. Minnie had also gone missing. Joe Ball had killed somewhere between 2 and 20, but it was only found for certain that he killed 2, Big Minnie being included. Since many of the women went missing, it is still uncertain as to how many he killed exactly. Joe Ball's wife later showed up in California. However, since many of the women that Ball was convicted of killing went missing, it is still unclear as to how many he actually killed. The Texas Rangers questioned Ball relentlessly, but he wouldn't crack. He gave them nothing. Unfortunately, his head handyman cracked and told of times that he was forced at gunpoint to feed pieces of female corpses to the alligators. And his old neighbor back in town had witnessed Ball hacking pieces of meat from a human and feeding them to his alligators. The cops had enough to get Ball. On September 24, 1938, police showed up at the Sociable Inn. Realizing that it was basically all over, Ball shot himself. It was fatal. Joe Ball took his secrets to the grave. Joe Ball could have possibly committed the crimes because after having fought in a war, Joe Ball was never the same again. It is never specifically stated what exactly was the cause of his behaviors, but it is most likely because of psychological disorders due to him being in the war.
Old DNA that has surpassed multiple decades proves a killer to be guilty, yet he cannot be prosecuted. His name is Albert DeSalvo, or also known as the Boston Strangler. Well, Albert DeSalvo was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts. It is known he had 4 or 5 siblings. His father was an abusive alcoholic. There was always violence in his childhood home. Due to his upbringing, he had grown up to be a delinquent, and no found evidence of drug use. While in court, DeSalvo was described as being homicidal, mentally diseased, paranoid, and schizophrenic. Was he married? Did he have any kids? Well, it is known that Albert DeSalvo was married to a German woman, although it is not quite known if he had any children. What was the location of the crimes that he committed? The location was in the Boston area of Massachusetts. They were mostly inside of apartment homes, and only one was in a public facility. How many people were killed? DeSalvo killed 13 women between the ages of 19 and 85. The time of the killing sprees took place from 1962 to 1964. What did the crime scene look like? DeSalvo's M.O. was a bow trademark. He made it mostly out of tying nylon stockings and other materials into a bow around the victim's neck. 12 of the victims died from being strangled, and 1 died from being stabbed 22 times. Was he a sociopath or a psychopath? Well, it is obvious that he was a sociopath. He was more impulsive and erratic than a psychopath. He was disorganized, careless about disposing of the victims' bodies, and he worked in a blitz pattern of attacking. He was a lust and thrill-seeking serial killer. As a child, DeSalvo tortured animals. DeSalvo didn't keep any parts of his victims' bodies. What was Albert DeSalvo's punishment? He was serving his sentence in MCI Cedar Junction in the state of Massachusetts, although he was never prosecuted because he was stabbed to death in the infirmary in 1973. However, DeSalvo did confess to the killings. That same day, Albert was found by chance at an identity parade. He was then sent to a Massachusetts state mental hospital. Was there any forensic evidence used in determining that DeSalvo was guilty? Yes, there was, although it took multiple decades in finally being able to determine that DeSalvo indeed was the Boston Strangler. October 26, 2001, DeSalvo's body was exhumed for DNA testing. December 6, 2001, forensic scientists announced that DNA evidence taken from Sullivan's body does not match DeSalvo's DNA. Friday, July 2013, DNA tests confirmed that Albert DeSalvo killed the serial killer's last victim. I think the reason that Albert DeSalvo committed these crimes is possibly due to him witnessing traumatizing events in his childhood life, and because of that, he developed psychological disorders. In court, Albert DeSalvo's psychiatrist, Dr. James A. Russell, testified that Albert DeSalvo was suffering from schizophrenia of the paranoid type. The mind is a powerful tool, and I think that even with the treatment Albert could have received, he would not received it until after he had committed the first couple of killings, and by then the treatment would be too late.
Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield, born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. In his childhood, Ed Gein grew up with his older brother Henry and his religious mother and alcoholic dad's home. Gein's mother never let him out the house at all. He mostly stayed home, away from everyone else outside, and did his chores around the farm. Ed's brother Henry died in a bushfire near the farm. Because of religious beliefs and influence from his mother, Gein never ever left home. After the death of his mother, Gein became deranged and eventually began searching cemeteries to find recently buried female corpses. He looked for the ones that resembled his mother. He would cut off the body parts and keep them as trophies, and later he returned the corpses into the graves. Eventually, Gein decided to stop robbing and began to murder. When police investigated the house of Edward Gein, they discovered 2 bodies, both women. One of the women he murdered went by the name of Bernice Warden. Bernice was a store clerk down in Plainfield and disappeared on November 16, 1957. Police reported that she was hung upside down, headless, and had a split rib cage, and said her body was dressed out like a deer. The next woman Gein murdered went by the name of Mary Hogan, a 54-year-old woman that ran a tavern. Police reported that she was captured on December 8, 1954. Gein shot her and killed her with a pistol. During an investigation of Gein's home, Hogan's face was found on one of the skull caps he converted. Ed Gein admitted to police after his mother died that he wanted to create a woman suit made from the skin of those dead bodies. He claims that he did so to eventually become his mother and quite literally crawl into her skin whenever he wanted. Some of the trophies that was found in his house were socks made from human flesh, a belt made from human nipples, a ceiling light pole consisting of human lips, the head of Mary Hogan found in a paper bag, human skull caps used in soup bowls, and also human skin fashioned into a lampshade and used to upholster chair seats. Ed Gein was convicted of the murder of 2 women in 1957. During investigation, police learned that he had practiced necrophilia and experimented with human corpses. Later on, Gein pleaded not guilty by reason by insanity. He was found unfit to stand trial and then was committed to a mental hospital for criminals. 10 years later, he would be declared fit to stand trial and was ultimately found guilty for murder. He was confined in many criminal psychiatric institutions, including the Central State Hospital in Wisconsin and the Mendota Mental Health Institute, where he died of respiratory and heart failure due to cancer on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77.